When Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February, its soldiers surrounded and attacked the city of Mariupol in the very southeast of the country. Mariupol is known by several different languages that are spoken locally: Ukrainian, Russian, and in Greek, because Mariupol actually has a very interesting connection with ethnic Greeks that goes way back into history. This region in particular of the south of Donbass, as well as Zaporizhia, Crimea and Odessa, all have minorities of ethnic Greeks living in them, the largest being in Donetsk, numbering around 77,500, whilst the other regions have between 3,000 to 2,000, and the rest of Ukraine has around 7,000 people who identify as ethnic Greeks, largely living in larger cities such as Kharkiv and in Kyiv itself. There are around 90,000 of these ethnic Greeks in total in Ukraine, although the number of people with Greek heritage is much higher, due to the fact that most ethnic Greeks no longer speak Greek and many have been assimilated into the broader population in Ukraine. This means that around 0.2% of Ukrainians are identifying as ethnic Greek as of today. This goes back to the 3rd and 4th centuries, when ethnic Greeks had actually founded several colonies around the Black Sea, and these are the locations of their colonies that were founded in just Ukraine, a lot of them in Crimea and others around Odessa, although they also founded colonies around the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov in what is today Russia, Ukraine, and further to the south and west in Romania as well. Around the 3rd or 4th century BC, these coalesced into a kingdom known as Pontus, and therefore many of these Greeks are today referred to as Pontic Greeks, which is also the name given to a dialect subgroup of the Greek languages. This lasted up until around the 13th century, when various Central Asian peoples such as the Mongols and the Tatars invaded the region. Quite famously, Crimea became home to the Tatars, called the Crimean Tatars, and they had an influence not only on the political situation in Crimea, but also on the linguistic situation of the Greeks that were living in that peninsula as well. Those Greeks who had closer communication and assimilated with incoming Tatar groups were becoming referred to as Urum, which actually comes from an old Turkic word for Roman, because they were seen as being Romans due to the fact that they were Greeks and therefore linked with the Byzantine Empire. The word Urum is also then used to refer to the language that they started to speak, which was in essence a Turkic language and which is still spoken by some of the ethnic Greeks today, and is therefore related to languages today such as Turkic, Turkmen, Kazakh and Azeri as well. On the other hand, there were also others, Greeks particularly in the south, to the south of the Crimean Mountains, who continued to speak their own dialect of Greek and didn't switch to speaking Tatar. This is known in English as Mariupol Greek, although I believe that the ethnonym for this is Rumaic Greek, again being similar etymologically to what had already been the case for Urum, and this is of course related to the modern Greek language, although there are substantial differences between Standard Greek from Greece and this variation of Pontic Greek, which is still spoken in Crimea and other parts of Ukraine today. These Pontic Greek influences were reinforced with waves of migration, largely in the advancing Ottoman Empire's wake, of many Greek speakers from Anatolia and other parts of the Black Sea region coming to Crimea to escape, because in Crimea at the time there was in fact an independent Greek-speaking principality that had ruled independently, although this too would be conquered by the Ottomans in the 15th century. The Ottomans would also eventually themselves be conquered in this region by the Russians, pushing in from the south and from the east, their conquest taking place in the 18th century. During the reign of Catherine the Great in 1783, and as a result of various Tatar rebellions against Russian rule, the ethnic Greeks were lifted from the Crimean Peninsula and instead relocated several hundred miles to the north on the northern shores of the Sea of Azov in what is today the Donetsk Oblast, many of them settling in the city that would later become known as Mariupol. During this time, also Ukrainians, Germans and Russians were also settled in the southern Donetsk region in order to stimulate an assimilation of the population that would be more loyal to the Russian regime in this area. What's interesting is that many of the old place names that the Greeks had for their cities back in Crimea were also brought over to Donetsk, and that's why today you have a Yalta, where the famous Yalta Confederation was carried out in 1945, and also a Yalta in the southern Donetsk region, as well as a little further away from both, the settlements of Hurzuf, Gurzuf, and Urzuf, which are both found in one in Crimea and one in the southern Donetsk region as well. However, under the Soviets, the ethnic Greeks of Ukraine and indeed of the wider Soviet Union faced increasing discrimination. In 1937, there was a pogrom against them carried out by the NKVD, which saw mass deportations and mass arrests of ethnic Greeks who were accused of anti-revolutionary activity, basically communist term for being an ethnic minority inside the country, because there was no real evidence that ethnic Greeks were indeed planning any kind of anti-revolutionary activity during this period. It's estimated that between around 15,000 to 50,000 ethnic Greeks were killed by the NKVD during this period, and over the course of the following decades, some 50,000 ethnic Greeks would relocate to Greece away from the Soviet Union. However, in 1946, there would be an influx of Greek refugees escaping from the Greek Civil War, which was raging in the home country of Greece at the time. Noting that the Greek Civil War was a conflict between the monarchist government of Greece, backed by the Western powers of the United Kingdom and the United States, whilst they fought against communist guerrillas who were obviously supported by the USSR itself. And so many of those fleeing from the conflict that were in these communist areas fled to the USSR, and indeed when that side lost the conflict, there were many tens of thousands who left, and many of whom actually went to join those groups of ethnic Greeks living in the Ukrainian SSR as it was at the time, because many of those Greeks actually in Greece had originally come from Anatolia and were actually Pontic Greeks, and so already had family living over in Ukraine at the time, given the historic connections between Anatolia, Greece, and Ukraine with the ethnic Greek population. As mentioned, in 2022, there are still tens of thousands of ethnic Greeks living in Ukraine to this day. Now, most of them, around 80,000 of them, speak Russian as a first language, as many ethnic Greeks have severed ties with their original language, their mother language of Greek or Pontic Greek, and spoke Russian, particularly because that is the majority language that is spoken in most of the places in southern and eastern Ukraine where the highest number of Greeks are to be found. Around 20,000 still speak their language of Rumaic Greek or Mariupol Greek, a version of Pontic Greek that is still largely in Mariupol, the city where there are some centers for learning the language, and several thousand in several villages still speak the Urum language, the Turkic language that is similar to Crimean Tatar and other Tatar languages that was taken over by the Greeks to this day. Now, situation hasn't always been easy between the Greek government and the Ukrainian government. The Greek government sometimes accusing the Ukrainian army of discrimination against ethnic Greeks, particularly in the latest spell of conflict that has occurred in the east of Ukraine. However, at the same time, Greece has actually been a strong proponent of Ukraine joining both NATO and the European Union. It's one of its staunchest allies that is already in both of these organizations, and it has indeed many times come up for the ethnic minority that is living in Ukraine at the moment, condemning the Russian invasion that occurred, and indeed already before that in 2014, condemning the Russian annexation of Crimea. Greece has also said that it would rebuild the maternity ward that was bombed by the Russian Air Force in the city of Mariupol, as this was actually in the center of an ethnic Greek community, and several of the victims are said to have been ethnic Greeks themselves. For the time being, it seems that the future of the ethnic Greeks of Mariupol, and indeed everyone in Mariupol, hangs very much in the balance, but their story remains a very interesting one nonetheless. That is it for this video, but before ending, I'd like to quickly say that half of the proceeds that I'm making from my channel this month will be going to helping refugees like those in Mariupol and in larger part in Ukraine to flee from the conflict. And if you can give, there will be links in the description below where you can look at the various charities and what they do, and if you should like to make a donation, then you can help out that way. But for now, that is it on this video about the ethnic Greeks of Ukraine, sometimes simply called the Mariupol Greeks, but of course there are ethnic Greeks living in other places to Mariupol, so I thought I'd refer to them as the ethnic Greeks. Let me know if you found this video interesting and if you'd potentially like to see a kind of video on the various languages of Ukraine. That's something I've been thinking about doing in the spirit of other language videos that I have, one on the British Isles and one on Spain, which you can both check out if you're interested in that. If you'd like to see anything else on the current conflict in Ukraine and some of the other angles on that, then do comment below and I will do my best to get moving on that front and to make some more videos about the situation. I must say thank you very much for watching. If you're new, remember to subscribe, give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed, and until the next time, I have been Hilbert and this has been The History.